Welcome to today's episode. I almost didn't make it today, but one of my calls cancelled, and here I am. So it's a rainy day today. It's kind of like a particularly lazy day, not to mention it's a holiday here. So let's just quickly get started. Moving on to the first one. That's from Anthro-Vision, kind of a long one. The financiers also had a distinctive creation myth, to use another common anthropological term, to justify their activities. Outsiders sometimes claim that financiers only practiced their craft to make money. However, the bankers did not present their activities to themselves that way. Instead, they invoked concepts such as efficiency, liquidity, and innovation. The creation story behind the craft of securitization, which was what the conference was about, was that this process made markets more liquid. This talks about how each group has a story about themselves. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. What matters is that they believe that's true for themselves. And it's important to understand this, that if you want to understand group dynamics, it's important to understand that everybody has this self belief in their heads, and so do groups. That they have this, what the author calls here, creative creation myth. So all of us, we carry stories in our heads. Sometimes this presents as bias, but this is about ourselves. That no, we are not in it for the money, or we are not in it for a particular reason. We are in it for an altruistic or an idealistic reason. We want to make markets more liquid. It's not all about money, and that's the reflection over here. Moving on to kill it with fire. Modernizations should be based on adding value, not chasing new technology. Familiar interfaces help speed up adoption. People gain awareness of interfaces and technology through their networks, not necessarily by popularity. This is really a sobering reality, for us engineers, for us software engineers, that we think that okay, but there might be like a new framework in town. What's going on right now? Quick is also kind of old news now, right? For example. So it seems that okay, if it's a new technology, that people will be excited, we'll sell more, or we'll appeal more, or whatever. But if you think about it, that's a very small crowd that actually follows the cutting edge. Most of the world, most of the audience, most of your customer base, or the base that you're trying to reach to, they they worry about the networks, not about not how new the technology is, or not how cool it is. They just worry about the networks. If they hear their friend talk about it, they'll be more inclined to try it. That's really about it. And this familiar interfaces help speed up adoption. That refers to that notion, that realization again, that if something is completely new, it it'll have a difficult time finding its place in the market. That's like, that could be a great product, that could be something that solves all our problems, but still, if it is not similar to anything that we have used so far, we'll not be sure about it. We'll have our doubts. We'll not be that willing to try it. And even if we try it, it'll be like with this half-hearted approach that will cause it to fail. So it's a familiarity. So if there is something new, but it has to be linked to something existing so that people can relate to it. If it is completely new, uh, it's very difficult to sell it. A lot of reasons. The book goes into that, but I'll move on from now to getting things done. Everything that might require action must be reviewed on a frequent enough basis to keep your mind from taking back the job of remembering and reminding. Okay, short, but it's actually quite powerful. That the philosophy of getting things done, the core idea that you have a system which you rely upon to store your task list, or to store whatever you need to store. For example, everything that should be in your mind space should be in that system, and that should be reliable, accessible, reliable, and only then can your mind let go of the task that it's holding on to. We've talked at length about various things. I think one thing that I've not really talked about before is the reason why it is important to free our mind from all of these tasks. The book goes into that. The the reason is that we the tasks themselves, they have different priorities. Some of them are very important, some of them are not that important, some of them urgent, not very urgent. But when we keep all of these things in our mind, we can't really categorize it that way. For us, when it's in our mind, all of the tasks, they have the same priority. So even though you're working on a highly important task, urgent priority, even if you're working on a task like that, something that's low priority, no importance at all, will keep nagging at you. And I'm sure you have witnessed this. I'm sure you have gone through this, and that is why you need a system to put that thought away. Because once you put it in a system that's reliable, then your brain can rest assured that okay, it's there in the system. But how do you make that system reliable? How do you make your brain trust that system? By doing it, by reviewing it frequently enough, by acting upon it, not just writing it down and putting it on a shelf or throwing it out. That doesn't work. Your brain knows that. You know that you're too smart for those kind of things. So you have to keep reviewing it frequently enough, and that is when in your mind, in your brain, in your heart, whatever the organ that you want to use over here, um, that is when you know that okay, I can let go of this task. All right, let's go on to 7.5 lessons about the brain. We talked about a lot of brain this episode, I guess. No wonder people create so called echo chambers, surrounding themselves with news and views that reinforce what they already believe. It reduces the metabolic cost and unpleasantness of learning something new. Unfortunately, it also reduces the odds of learning something that might change a person's mind. Oh, that's some days it's kind of very what's the word? The coincidence, but I'm not really finding the word. Anyway, it's kind of related to all the three highlights that we talked about so far. The first one that we talked about from Anthro-Vision about what was that? About having a creation myth, about believing, believing a story about yourself. That's really what this talks about. Echo chambers surrounding themselves with news and views. It's not quite the same thing, but it's related to that. Then getting things done. We talked about. Actually, yeah, it's not quite related to getting things done, but kill it with fire. The familiarity and all of those things that we talked about over there. Same thing over here. Because why do we crave familiarity? Because it reduces the metabolic cost and unpleasantness of learning something new. That is why people would always go with something that's familiar, because it's easier to learn. That's just human nature. You might, if you're the one who's introducing something new, you might think it is obvious, it's so much better. Why aren't people adopting this immediately? But you do the same thing, when it's not your thing that you need to adopt, or that could be helpful to you. When somebody else is selling things to you, selling in terms of like in its widest sense, not just selling for money, but selling for adoption or whatever. So yeah, that's really it. That's really what this is about. The well-lived life. Boundaries are a hot topic in today's culture, yet we often think of them as a ways to keep people out, like fortress walls. I believe this is a misunderstanding. Boundaries come from deep within us. They're about how we choose to spend our energy, what's worth our attention, and what isn't. This doesn't say it, but it's like the author goes on to explain that boundaries are really about letting people in, the people that you want. So it's not, it's like a subtle thing, because, if you think of keeping, just letting some people in, you're essentially talking about keeping people out. But the mindset shift is important, because when you start with boundaries, you may be tempted to put like a blanket ban on everything, and that doesn't help. If you start with that mindset, that doesn't help you. That kind of closes your mind. So when we set boundaries for ourselves, and we should, the idea is, the intention should be that we are being selective um, about what we are letting in. To use a term from software engineering, it's like allow list and deny list. So if you're setting up a firewall and setting up a deny list, you are essentially saying that these things are not allowed. But if you set up an allow list, you're saying that only these things are allowed, everything else is not allowed. So that is the intention. That is the intention over here. That's kind of like it's a metaphor. So again, as we have discussed before, don't stretch the metaphor too far. But yeah, it's just to help understand. And we are in. Thanks for the feedback. Life can be messy and confusing, and simple identity labels remind us of our values and priorities, of what we are trying to live up to. If I'm a man of my word, well, that settles it. I may be tempted to break my commitment, and I can even justify doing so but that's not who I am. Okay. So I think it's straightforward, but I'm struggling to remember the context of this one. Um, what was the author really trying to say? It's quite apparent that if you assign labels to yourself, for example, man of my word, that's a label that you would give yourself, and you frame an identity for yourself that um, I think the context here is that even though you may be tempted to break my commitment, because a man of your word, you won't break your commitment because you're a man of your word. And you can even justify that, okay, in this reason, in this particular time, you had to break that commitment, but that's not who I am. So the context, I think, is that the labels actually stop you from doing it, or they probably just limit the amount of times you may break the label. But yeah, I think I've spent enough time. Moving on. Pirates in the Navy. While the main business improves and executes on the currently successful products and business models, the role of innovators is to explore and search for new, profitable business models. It's quite straightforward, but the key thing over here is profitable business models. So the book is kind of repeating this point everywhere that the innovators, if there is like an innovation wing within the organization or some role of that sort in the organization, it's not to exist for its own sake. It's really the goal should be to find new profitable business models. That's really the goal of that innovation, that it should link back to business at some point of time. And it stands to reason that, okay, it won't happen in months time, for example. Yeah, it could take years, but that should be the goal, that should be the north star, so to speak, that ultimately you're introducing a new profitable business model. So let's move on to Braving the Wilderness. What is the conversation about and what is it really about? This sounds simple but tends to be easier said than done. The intention is the deepest level reason why the topic is so important to the person. We have to understand what truly matters to us and learn why this topic is so important to the other person as well. Mhm. I think it's really quite straightforward, but the distinction that the awareness that whatever conversation that you're entering into, there might be a superficial reason for having that conversation, but then the intention behind the conversation is something that you should really think about. That's what helps you both, because now you understand why the topic is important to the other person, why is it important to yourself, and then you can hit the points that you need to straight away. Moving on. Excuse me. Get it done. To give advice, you have to search your memory to figure out what you've learned about how to or not to go about your goal. This memory search reminds advisors just how much they know. Further, in the process of giving advice, you form specific intentions and lay out concrete plans of action, both of which increase motivation. And if that's not enough, giving advice also boosts self confidence. I commonly say this, I've said this so many times, I can't even remember when I started saying this, that if you want to learn something better, teach it to somebody else. Case in point, Getting Things Done, it's a book I'm just reading, I'm near the end, and it's a fairly new topic for me, but that didn't stop me from proposing a webinar for my team, for my organization. I mean, I should really be the last person. I just came across the methods. I've been aware of the methods in some time, but I just understood the methods deeply now after reading the book. And it's just one read of the book, mind you. It's not that I've been doing this for some time. And why am I the best person to give the webinar? Because I think, well, actually, I don't think of it that way, but still, um, why do I encourage people to give webinars or give training in this kind of situation? Is that because they know what is it like to learn. They have just learned it, so they can hit those points straight away for other beginners, other people who are looking to learn that particular thing. That's exactly what this is saying. I think that because when you're giving advice, you have to search your memory to figure out what you've learned. So you're searching for it, you're reminiscing, you're remembering it, and that kind of strengthens your own knowledge. And you form specific intentions. It's not just that you remember, but you also form plans and how do you do something. And finally, it increases self confidence. So it's this is the reason. This is like the psychological reason why it is so important to teach. Moving on, the earned life. What I want you, the reader, to see is that our lives can be more fulfilling when we align these three variables so that action is synced when with ambition is synced with aspiration. Okay. There are three things the author talks about in this particular section: action, ambition, and aspiration. These are ways to set goals at three different levels. Action is something immediate, near term goal. Ambition is little spread out. It's kind of maybe like a month down the line, year down the line, something like that. And aspiration, there's no end line. It's your whole life. It's a non-stop thing. Your aspirations can change. That's a different thing. But aspiration will always be there. It won't go away. You can't say that, okay, I aspire to this and you've completed it one day. That's not aspiration, that's ambition. So the author is saying that our lives can be more fulfilling when we align these three variables, when we're consciously looking at it, when we look at our aspiration and match our ambition along with that, and then with match our actions along with our ambition. In other words, it's goal setting. It's not something new. It's just goal setting. That you set goals. You set your immediate tasks based on your goals. The author takes it a little further, a step further with aspiration. Because goals have a timeline. You can say that, okay, I have a 10-year plan, but that's also a finite goal that, okay, at the end of 10 years, it's ended. Aspiration doesn't end. That brings us to the end of our highlights today. It was a fun day. The coincidences and everything. I think most of the highlights, I had a lot of fun discussing it. I think another one of the best days, like I said earlier, that I almost skipped today, with it being rain and kind of like a particularly lazy day. But I had a cancellation and found time to do this. I'm glad I did because it was really interesting day. So thank you for watching.